jumping back though to Dolan, essentially though, all this being based on meta-analysis, once again, of people who are actually experiencing these beings on a craft and experiencing these beings interacting with them. So now he's, I think, finishing discussing the fourth phase, and then he's going to touch on the next group.
Now, even though throughout our long history, people saw what we would call UFOs, and they also encountered beings, or I guess I should say claimed that they encountered beings that were not from here. It was really only during the 20th century that this really happened in the sense of non-human looking beings, that is aliens. It's true, like there were sightings of so-called fairies and little people and things like that. So I shouldn't make it a full blanket statement like that, but I'm talking about the types of aliens that people report nowadays. That includes beings we call the Greys, right? And it also includes other types of beings that are sometimes overlooked that people have described. Other humanoid beings that are short, but not the Greys, sometimes described in various crash retrieval accounts. I discuss this in the book as well. It also includes taller entities, and it includes beings that look like other species on Earth, like insect-like beings or reptilian type beings, and others still that look sort of human, but not quite human. So when you go through these reports, as I have gone through them in preparing this book, you have to allow for a substantial amount of error on the part of witnesses. I think that's just inevitable. But the thing is, there's been a tremendous amount of consistency with the basics. In my view, something definitely is going on regarding other types of beings that are here. Now, these other types of beings do not all act the same. One group has consistently been linked to the phenomenon of abductions, and that is the Greys, of course. I spent a fair amount of space in the book analyzing the Greys and what they appear to be up to. There is clearly a covert operation going on. And in the book, I make the case that this operation is known to at least some of the human elite that has power today. And also, I make the case that this elite is powerless over what is going on, or at least they feel that they are powerless to do anything about it. And that is one big reason for secrecy on their part. It's not the only reason, but it is a big reason. I don't think that they are able to stop this. And if they were to out the whole thing to the rest of the world, I don't think that they are confident that they could deal with it effectively, even under those conditions. And I think that's why they're not. That is one reason why they're not saying anything. I also think, and I wrote in this book, that the abduction program, I think, is going on for multiple reasons. It's not just, I mean, the main reason everyone talks about is the creation of a genetic hybrid species, one that looks human while still possessing critical qualities that the Greys have, and also their allies. If you believe that the insectolin type beings are their allies, which I think David Jacobs is probably right on this, and that the insectolin type beings are really running the show in the background. I think that's a reasonable hypothesis. But anyway, the point of these hybrids is that they look human, but they have certain qualities that these other beings also have. One of those qualities is some form of telepathy, or if you don't want to use the word telepathy, maybe some level of mental influence that they are able to exert. So yes, you can see this element of it as a form of infiltration, and I do think that is a genuine possibility. I also think that there are other motivations for abductions that are separate from hybridization. And I go into these in the book. One of them I would just simply characterize as a highly sophisticated monitoring operation via implants. I definitely think that is going on. And not just by the Greys.
So once again, this is him really diving into the meta-analysis of many, many thousands of experiencers. And the key things we're focusing on here is not all the really like minute speculative stuff, but what are the core things that a lot of people are saying that is correlating a lot. There's, a lot of people are saying this specific group, like the Greys, this specific group, like the Mantids, and seeing a lot of times when they're under regression and recalling back what they experienced, that the Mantis were essentially directing, and they felt like through multiple variables in their mind, their body language, the way they acted, what they heard or experienced, they felt like the Mantids were more in charge for the Greys, essentially. And so what you're starting to realize, and this is what Dolan says also that's important, I think, here, is that you have multiple people in this whole field of ufology that, I'll just be very blunt here, there's two leading figures that I respect both of their work, but I'm slightly critical of their work to one degree, where I think they're being a little bit narrow-minded. And the two main figures are Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Greer. Dr. Greer, a lot of people give him pushback because he thinks all ETs are benevolent and good. Dr. Jacobs, people give him pushback because he thinks all ETs are negative and malevolent. I think it's a mixture. I think we live in a very large universe, similar to, as Dolan says, and that basically we have some benevolent beings, we have malevolent beings, and I think we just have neutral beings that are just here to just kind of watch the show and are very hands off. So I don't think it's absolute one way or the other, and I think it's an important nuance that needs to be kind of put out in the open when we start talking about these different groups, and people start to get kind of anxiety and fear as these possibilities of these kind of crazy conspiracy theories might actually start to be a little bit more true, that these types of beings do exist. And ultimately, I'm very optimistic, though, that we can get our act together, we can make smart diplomatic relations with the benevolent good groups, and we can insulate ourselves from any malevolent bad guys by being in a strong alliance with the benevolent good guys. And I think part of that alliance would be, hey, just stop killing each other and maybe put away these really dirty and nasty weapons, and we'll give you great weapons to help with self-defense, but aren't going to ruin your atmosphere, and maybe have some fail-safes where you don't kill each other with it, but it'll protect you against any type of threat they might have, right? We don't know that level of tech and all that, but I am very hopeful that we can be smart about this. And this was sort of when we first started this whole series, was sort of the tough, this is apparently what happens by what lawyer Eisenhower and others have said, and other corroborating evidence of people at the airfields. The word on the street goes that apparently Eisenhower, and there's a lot of evidence of people seeing him land at that airport that day, and we went over that he did meet with at least one group that day, and the word is from his granddaughter, Laura, that he met with multiple groups, and that the Greys were not asking him to give up our nuclear weapons, and the benevolent sort of humanoid group were asking us to give them up, but we're also saying we'll give you amazing tech to help rejuvenate and make your planet thrive and your people prosper. And the word is he succumbed to his sort of military paranoia coming out of World War II, that they needed to still have these nukes to protect ourselves. And the idea is that we have basically created some sort of exchange program with the Greys to allow them to abduct people on this planet in exchange for certain tech they might have to reverse engineer. And this is why certain abductees and experiencers also say they do see sometimes military officials on the craft with the Greys, that we know and are willingly just kind of monitoring their program of us.
I'd never heard of that.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's a big red hill.
Thickens.
And take it as you want, but that is sort of the main sort of theory leading up to post-World War II up to now, kind of.
Yeah. I definitely feel like I definitely like that Richard Dolan said before that in the fourth stage of humanity, he mentioned genetic engineering on top of AI and on top of all those things. And, when there are people like the David Ickes and really the ones whose ideas are the most uncomfortable to look at as far as the transhuman agenda.
Well, the reptilians, that's his big thing, is exposing this bizarre or crazy outwardly notion that actually humanoid reptilian beings actually exist. And I remember when I first saw that, and when anyone would hear that just sounds so bananas.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, this is not about really just what's uncomfortable for us. If you hear, part of it is we're looking to the abyss, but I'm a firm believer in the more we know, the less we'll be afraid, right? Ignorance leads to fear, and so a lot of part of this meta-analysis, a large group that a lot of people say they've experienced, is that group, and we have to just own that.
For sure. I think we also need to be super honest with ourselves. Like I get skepticism. I get where skepticism comes from, and I have it, but I think it's used in an imbalanced way with a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are skeptical and they're not open-minded. But if you can hold, and that's what that is. The absence of open-mindedness with skepticism turns to cynicism. Yeah. The absence of skepticism with open-mindedness turns to gullibility. Right. So, the interesting thing about that is, when you look back through history, you see a lot of reptilian iconography that doesn't prove anything. But what it does say is that we come from thousands of years, let's just say a couple thousand years of cutting the tallest poppy, if you know what that phrase means. The tallest poppy is like if anyone stands out from the herd, right. If you're special in a way that most people can't conceive of, cut it down. It looks odd. You want a field of poppies that's all the same size, all the same height. And so the idea of cutting the tallest poppy, we've been doing that with everything, with our ideology. We've been doing it with potentially the way, definitely the way we feed ourselves, our morphology, our civilization. A lot of these things we are conforming, we're homogenizing in big ways. If we do that, if we go on this several thousand year long normalization campaign, then anything that our ancestors used to possibly be like, yeah, there's totally beings, they visit from the stars, then we'll look at people like Wilfred Buck today, and from the Cree, saying that our ancestors say that we have constantly been communicating with star people and traveling the cosmos using stargates, and using wormhole technology, and not technology that's outside of us, but actually inherent within us. That would seem crazy to us, even though First Nations people are talking about that. You mentioned Mantid. Is that like praying mantis?
Yeah, like basically they look like very large 7 to 9 foot tall praying mantis beings. And
a lot
of times wearing robes. So these praying mantis are wearing clothes. Like
interesting.
It's just like,
that's very Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah.
You know what that reminds me of? All those DMT trip reports.
Oh yeah.
Huge praying mantis, insectoid-like beings that were extremely intelligent, and maybe they were like 5 million times the size of them, but that could be the difference of the DMT state. Mm-hmm. The only way that your symbolic mind can conceptualize something so much more intelligent is to just make it far bigger, right? So these are just concepts, but we used to work at Gaia. Just south of where we were working is the largest alpine basin in the world. So you look where Crestone, Colorado is, and you see that there's all this UFO activity and sightings and, paranormal phenomena that happen around there. The indigenous, the First Nations people, no one lived there in that basin. They would hunt there during the good season, and they'd get the hell out of there during the winter seasons. And even warring tribes would call truce to go in there. But several of those tribes mention that there are ant-like people under the ground that come out every now and then. Several of the tribes, different tribes, have these motifs of insectoid ant-like people, their height, their size, coming out of the ground, and they live in subterranean habitats. So there may also be a lot going on right beneath our feet that we just have very, very little clue of.
Right. Well, we know we don't live in a hollow. I mean, in my strong opinion, a lot of science I think backs up. We don't live in a hollow Earth, but we know there are large cavernous subterranean bubbles essentially that can appear in subterranean areas. And I've been watching this show, The Hunt for Skinwalker Ranch, and a lot of this, people who probably watch this right now are watching it, but I recommend it. It's on History Channel. It's season 2 now, but a lot of Travis Harris, he's an astrophysicist. They have a lot of top-notch scientists at the ranch, and they're doing all these massive tests with thermo, nuclear, magnetic, all these different tests on these certain areas. And a big thing that pops up is this idea of these skinwalkers that have been there for hundreds of years. All the native people nearby have talked about similar to what you're saying. And a lot of the owners and original people who've lived on this ranch talk about this idea of portals. And they had some weird things happen on the show that kind of correlate to that. But it's this idea of portals and beings, things coming out and popping through, and this, and it starts to kind of line up with what the native indigenous people said all over the world. Mm-hmm. Ancient archaeology, what we're knowing now and more with covert space program things. And all of these concepts, portals, faster than light speed travels, interdimensionality, all these things, like I said, I think these are all just different forms of some type of new, more advanced technology or way to manipulate reality very directly. And that's just like, that's the level of how primitive we are when you start really saying, if these things are real and they exist and these beings already know how to manipulate them to this degree where they can just use it like taking an elevator up and down, then yeah, we're so primitive. I mean, and I think our arrogance, we should already be that way. We're a very young species, really, cosmically speaking. And we are really the new kid on the block, but we have a big ego, I'm sure, when they look at us, we are very full of ourselves with the way we treat our environment and the things around us. Like we're we don't even think we're part of the animal kingdom anymore. Essentially, we're like, we've got off that because we've got iPhones, and it's like, so we are very disconnected in that way. But the bottom line is, whether you like us or not, what we're already starting to do with technology and all these major precipice points, I think is going to affect more than just our planet. It's having a ripple effect. It's bigger than us on the cosmic level. And that's kind of what DOLAN was talking about with this whole fourth phase, is that they're seeing and monitoring and going, okay, now they're getting to a point similar to when we started using nukes. There's a lot more activity. All these other things, hard AI, geoengineering, all these things. If we're already some strange, slightly genetic experiment, and then we start messing with our CRISPR and our own DNA, maybe they're like, hey, no, like that's our thing, or you're not able to start doing that. Like, we don't know the level of what their interest is and why they're appearing more. What we do definitely know, though, is that there is a lot more activity, clearly. And we do know that we are exponentially growing very fast, and we're hitting some major time markers for evolution on a lot of different fronts. So it makes sense. Right now would be a key time for them to get more involved, but there's no guarantees. I'm not sitting here saying like they're definitely going to happen after this June hearing or this or this. I've said from the get, the more we can do to, I think, get honest and real about this as a collective, and the more we can take steps to push that transparency on our elected government officials and people who work for us. Let's all remember this. They are servants to the people. The things they're doing are a lot of times unconstitutional. We can demand more transparency. We can handle this. We're big boys and girls.
Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.